And I'm going to share my screen and let Sydney Copps Richardson get us started.
Great. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for being here today. I'm excited to get started in this conversation. So again, my name is Sydney Copps Richardson. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the director of SAGE's National LGBTQ plus Elder Housing Initiative. A little bit about me. My background is in housing advocacy, direct care and service, and organizing around HIV, mental health, housing and houselessness, as well as a range of other things, as well as LGBTQ plus anti-violence work and education. I've been with SAGE for about 5 years. And for folks that don't know who SAGE is, next slide, please. SAGE is the world's largest and oldest organization dedicated to improving the lives of LGBTQ plus older people. And we aim to foster an understanding of aging in all communities and promote positive images of LGBTQ plus elders or seniors in our later years. We offer a variety of programs and services for LGBTQ plus elders, both in New York City, where I am based, as well as nationwide. And we developed the NHI, or the National Housing Initiative, in 2015 because we saw a real need in our communities. And this is a hub of support in response to the housing challenges and crises that we see in LGBTQ plus aging communities. And I can share a little bit more information about the National Housing Initiative, but we are a resource to provide trainings, webinars like this, events, technical assistance. We have toolkits and publications, and we work to support and advocate folks that are interested in developing this model of affirming housing that we're going to be talking about today. We also work closely with our policy team around the policy priorities and needs locally and nationally for LGBTQ plus elders, which, as we know, is particularly pressing in the current political climate. Next, I am going to share a little bit of data about housing challenges for LGBTQ plus elders. So according to an equal rights study, about 50% of older same-sex couples applying for senior housing were subjected to discrimination. And on top of that, 50% of single LGBTQ plus elders believe they'll have to work well beyond retirement age, compared to 27% of their single non-LGBTQ plus peers. And then 51% of LGBTQ plus elders are very or extremely concerned about having enough money to live on. 1 in 4 transgender older adults reported discrimination when seeking housing. We know that that number is likely much higher due to the lack of data collected in trans communities, particularly aging transgender communities. And we know that 50% of same-sex older adults in the study reported experiencing housing discrimination. This statistic, again, is likely much higher due to the barriers that we see in data collection, which is something that has been a policy priority itself at SAGE. Next, I want to level set a little bit and have us think about, I think you can click it one more. Sorry, Philip, these slides are a little bit weird. There we go. The impacts of history and on what I like to think about as collective trauma on aging communities. I also like to frame this as that queer people are not just trauma. We are not just defined by our trauma, but community trauma and collective trauma is very real and is unfortunately something that we see impacts communities ourselves as we age. So decades of discrimination have impacted LGBTQ plus elders who came of age at a time that was similar in some ways to the current climate, but also very different. This prejudice was not just individualized and interpersonal, it was also validated by the scientific and medical communities and professionals who labeled being gay or quote homosexuality as a mental disorder, being trans as a mental disorder. So systemic institutions and public policy played a deep role in this. At the time of McCarthyism and the Lavender Scare, people could have been fired, arrested, or sent to a psych ward for loving someone of the same sex or for not adhering to gender norms. And in 1953, President Eisenhower signed an executive order defining, amongst other, quote, security risks, sexual perversion. So basically, a reason for employment termination. So for many folks, this might have led to extreme fear, a denial of feelings, or a denial of who they are, or a belief or a hope that they could be changed, or they had a sickness that could be cured. And this is the root of many anxieties that we see for LGBTQ plus elders when we see in housing access and safety, and also the perception of safety and trust. And who can you trust in these kinds of systems that you're navigating, especially as you age and changes are happening in your life? Isolation is huge for our communities. We have seen this deeply exacerbated by the pandemic. Stonewall House, which is one of the buildings that Sage has been a part of in Brooklyn, which we'll talk about a little later, was leased up in March of 2020 in New York City. So the timing of it was incredibly traumatic. People were moving into an affirming building. We also see the deep isolation and also the collective memory of the past, of the HIV epidemic, and of the lack of public safety responses to certain communities as public health crises have been deeply impacting folks. So isolation is huge for our communities. We've seen that in the pandemic compounded, but many LGBTQ plus folks rely on families of choice or networks made up of individuals who are around the same age. Many LGBTQ plus elders do not have children, or I say traditional notions of children, because we all create families, or may have bad relationships or no relationships with their families of origin. So next, excuse me, knowing this context, we see that some of the most identified challenges for LGBTQ plus elders as folks age involve their housing or their medical care settings. We know the connection between the systemic and the interpersonal kinds of violence, healthcare barriers, employment discrimination, and other forms of inequity are always tied to housing security. So I'll just share some of the barriers that we see folks facing: shelter access and safety. We know that shelter, if someone is experiencing homelessness or a risk of homelessness, shelter is not considered safe, especially for transgender communities. And so if shelter access or shelter referrals are one kind of route to more secure, affordable housing, entire communities might be more cut off from that. We see, as I mentioned, the invisibility in data collection. I think we need to kind of fight the stigma that LGBTQ plus elders don't exist. LGBTQ plus elders are everywhere. We're going to hear from one of our fiercest advocates, Don, in a minute, around his work and his story. And we really need to fight the erasure that is happening, because data collection also deeply impacts funding, financing, and resources available. I mentioned family of origin rejection or loss. This can create deep insecurity as people age and might need more support and don't know who to rely on, and also might not feel safe relying on in-home care services if you don't know if they're culturally affirming. It's one of the most intimate spaces you can be in if you are aging or experiencing some form of health or ability challenges, to have a stranger in your home taking care of you in very intimate ways. The lack of local legal protections deeply impacts housing access, and we've seen the sweeping pushback and kind of violent legislation that is happening against LGBTQ plus communities in the country, particularly right now around housing access. We see religious exemption laws, and that impacts someone's ability to access safe, affordable housing. Due to some of the factors I mentioned earlier, we know that there's income disparity, there's disparate poverty levels amongst LGBTQ plus elders, there's healthcare discrimination and trauma, which also is exacerbated as we age, right? So if you have not felt safe, or if you experienced explicit harm in healthcare, medical, therapy settings as a young person, you are less likely to engage. you are less likely to trust providers, and you're less likely to be open about the health that you have or you don't, that you're struggling with. We also see landlord discrimination, which at times can be hard to prove, even with the protections that do exist in housing. And we see the risk to experiencing intimate partner violence, elder abuse, or exploitation really compounded for LGBTQ plus elders because of the precariousness of social support and support networks. And we'll just think about like unsafe aging care, the perception of unsafe aging care, and the reality of unsafe aging care. And so someone has to move into a nursing home, palliative care, all of these types of aging care services that exist. If they're not culturally competent, that might just not even seem like an option. And that is also magnified by the fact that resources and costs are a huge part of that. And what is actually available if you are on a limited income is very, very minimal. This is all compounded for for people of color in terms of racism, for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color who have had to deal with both racism and discrimination around their gender identity or sexual orientation throughout their lives. And we can't ignore the legacies of racism in housing policy and in the intersections of compounded trauma that exists for LGBTQ plus people of color and within LGBTQ plus communities as well. And so really looking at the impact of racism on housing insecurity and the ways it's played out explicitly in public policy, in criminalization and employment discrimination, and other forms of violence against folks of color that we see now and we have seen historically. So racism might be more prevalent in an elder's life than their LGBTQ identity, and that's really important to think about, as well as the fact that we need to kind of disrupt this notion that to be LGBTQ plus means to be white, middle upper class, cisgender. We need to think about the intersections of identities and how important that is when we think about housing access. So next, one way to address some of these challenges across the age spectrum is through the development of safe, affordable, affirming housing. And we know that housing done well can provide the space and the opportunities for healing and for resilience, recovery in the face of trauma and oppression. And we also can't talk about cultivating home without talking about cultivating community. So this conversation is also really, to me, about the importance of community and what it looks like to have a space to age well and with ease as you are aging and might not have as many resources or support systems. So when we say LGBTQ plus affirming housing, we simply mean housing that provides a welcoming environment of community of peers and allies, and often includes voluntary culturally competent services for LGBTQ plus elders. This picture is a picture of folks that live in Stonewall House in Brooklyn, New York. And like I said, that opened in March in 2020. And our Bronx building, that is 145 units of affordable housing. And our Bronx building opened in 2021, and that is 84 units of LGBTQ plus affirming affordable senior housing. And something that I also think about is, last month we had National Coming Out Day, and I think it's important to think about within the context of aging and the challenges discussed when people choose to come out, how people negotiate coming out again and again. And across the age spectrum, coming out can be different, and it is not always a choice, and can also be a negotiation or a calculation that is about survival. So when we think about this, again, this model of housing is not a way to isolate people, but a way to create resilience in physical, emotional, social health and wellness. And thinking about when and how we choose to come out, if it is a choice, if we cannot come out, if we've never come out, if people perceive us to be queer and what that means. When we're thinking about transitional housing, meeting your neighbors, losing community, relying on system support, or moving in a state of grief into a nursing care or aging care facility, coming out is a really complex thing, and we often see elders going back into the closet. Next, I'm just going to show a brief slide of Stonewall House, sorry, in Fort Greene. And I mentioned the two buildings that Sage was a part of developing, the first in New York City. Both are 100% affordable housing, tenants making 50% and below of AMI. And I'm going to leave it to our esteemed guests to kind of dive deeper into what this can look like beyond the kind of New York City context. So thank you for having me, and I'm here for questions in a little bit. I'll turn it back over to you, Philip.
Thank you. I apologize for the noise in the background. We have a little dog problem. But thank you, Sydney. I'm going to turn it over to Donald to share his experience. Again, if you have questions, you can throw them in the Q&A or the chat. We'll cover those at the end. You're on mute, Donald.
Well, we've just crossed the digital divide. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Don Bell. I'm coming to you from Chicago. My pronouns are he, him, his, and you'll notice there's a number behind my pronouns, and that's my age. I'm 74 years old, and I think that in order to deal with the issues of ageism in our society, we have to get to the place where we can embrace our ages as easily as we embrace our other identities. It's a significant part of us, and to get to the place where aging does not mean growing lesser, does not mean incompetence, does not mean lack of ability. We have to learn to embrace our ages. So I'm 74, I'm very proud of it, and I see my aging as survival, I see it as achievement, I see it as development, and I'm glad to have had the gift of these years because I've left a lot of people along the way, a lot of people who are much younger. And for those of you who are not supportive of the idea of aging or don't think that it can be a good thing, a good positive experience, then I ask you, at what age do you want to stop? So I think that where I am is where those of you who are younger than I want to be. And welcome to the club. Aging is not a bad thing. So with that being said, I'll be talking to you from actually 3 different perspectives today. I am the chair of the Illinois Commission on LGBTQ+ Aging, which is the first commission of its kind legislatively established in the United States. And while there are many progressive states like California, Massachusetts, and others that address the issues of LGBTQ aging, generally those commissions and those authorities have been set up by the sitting governor of that time. But with us going through the legislative process, we have ensconced this commission into the structure of the state of Illinois government. And the question that we're asking overall is whether or not all of our citizens, including LGBTQ elders, are being well served. We enjoy full civil rights in the state of Illinois, and that's something that's not universal, because while it is true that LGBTQ+ people can marry anywhere in all 50 states and all possessions and territories of the United States, in 29 states, the day after you marry, you can be fired for being LGBTQ identified. So we're very proud of being where we are, and we hope that other states will join us, and that nationally at some point there will be an establishment of a civil rights bill around sexual orientation and gender identity, so that all citizens of the United States have full recognition. In addition to serving on that state commission, I am a resident of the Town Hall Apartments, America's 4th and Chicago's 1st LGBTQ senior-friendly residence. Now, senior friendly or LGBT affirming doesn't mean senior exclusive or LGBT exclusive, because we honor all open housing laws, all human rights ordinances of our municipalities, counties, and states. And this is a movement that we actually fought for here in the state of Illinois. If you'd known me 50 years ago, I was down in Champaign, Urbana, where we lobbied for the inclusion of sexual orientation in the human rights ordinances of each of those cities in that county, and then subsequently brought that movement north to Chicago and Cook County, and subsequently to the state of Illinois. So all of that has been very important to us. The progress that LGBT people have made has come over a period of time, but the progress that LGBT people make, just like the progress that all other marginalized communities make, whether it's race, gender, class, or whatever, whenever the rights of marginalized people are recognized, the people who are part of the privileged parts of society also benefits. It costs privileged people nothing to recognize the humanity, the rights, the sanctity of marginalized people. And my third capacity that I'll be speaking to you in is as a member of the development community too, because I'm sitting on the board of directors of a project that we call One Roof Chicago, where we are attempting to build an intergenerational LGBTQ affirming residence on the south side of Chicago, in primarily African-American community. And again, it will be a residence that will accept a much broader range of our community, not only in terms of race, but also in terms of age. And the intergenerational relationship is one that is valued and essential within the LGBTQ expanded community altogether. How we relate, whether we're elders or we're youth, is very important, because as human beings, we have the need for social connection, social interaction. And while many of us in the community, or some of us in the community, have biological families and links, we also have our value of chosen family. So for those people of either generation who are alone in the world, we try to maintain a community that values everybody and brings everybody together. There's a reason why there's a life process, and there's a need from both ends. From the aging in, we have experience and legacy to pass on, but from the youth in, we too learn about staying abreast of what's going on, staying connected, and aging in vitality. So both generations need each other. So we're very excited about the potential of this project. Now, one of the things that I'd like to take a few minutes on, if you don't mind, is talking about who we are as a community, we LGBTQ aging people. And this is who we are. We are generally people in our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. We are people who are the children of what was called the greatest generation. Our parents survived the Second World War and lived through the Depression. And for many of us, we're part of the boomer generation, the largest generation ever born. And what was significant about our generation was, first of all, we were born at the end of the greatest human conflicts in human history. Both the First World War and the Second World War killed more people than all of human conflict before it. So to mark that record twice within a period of nearly 20 years was incredible. And then the Great Depression, which nearly brought the world to its knees all over again. So our parents went through a lot of things, but what they did for us was not only were we the largest in number, but we were the first generation born without the responsibility of child labor. So the whole idea of human development changed in our time. And as a result of that, we had many more privileges than preceding generations. And that is a significant part of us. So when we talk about youth and the youth movement, we had the advantage of being youth movement 1.0. We lived the entire arc of the civil rights movements of the 20th century, starting out with race and labor, going on to women's rights, going on to what was called gay lib at the time, and going on to ecology and environment, and what we refer to as global warming today. So we've had a great deal of change in our time, but we've also suffered a tremendous amount of loss. We've lost people to war, we've lost people to drugs, we've lost people to the proliferation of guns and violence, and we've lost people to HIV/AIDS. And what many people don't recognize as we're dealing with the issues of COVID today is that COVID is the second pandemic for our community in 40 years. And there are lessons to be learned from the LGBTQ community for the general community in surviving the effects of COVID. So unfortunately, as we have lived a life of being silenced and shamed and stigmatized, our value in society has not been truly recognized. And hopefully, as we continue the process of growing and liberating our community, we will also continue the process of having the general community understand the value of this part of the community, embrace us, and recognize that we make positive contributions to all human society. Okay, with that being said, I would say that one of the things that we definitely want to foster under our value of family of choice, community of choice, is we don't want to descend into generational warfare. The relationship between our generations is important to us. There's nothing that we have lived through in the elder generation that we would wish for the youth generation to ever experience again. I don't want you to live under the situations that I lived under. You know, I was born on August the 9th, 1949. And at that time, homosexuality was universally against the law throughout the United States. So we were born criminalized. And it wasn't until 1962 here in the state of Illinois where we became the first state to decriminalize homosexuality. And that trend started. We were born also at a time when homosexuality was listed in the DSM. So we were born pathologized. And it took until 1974 for that to change, where homosexuality was no longer listed as a psychological or psychiatric condition. And finally, at the time that I was born in the middle of the 20th century, most houses of worship and most faiths told us that we were inconsistent with the plans, with the desires of the Creator, however that Creator was conceived for that particular culture. So we were born demonized. And growing up, we were not part of the national conversation the way we are. We didn't even have language for talking about who we were. You know, yeah, many of us felt different, but it took until maturity to to stumble on words like homosexuality and to find out what they were. I can tell you, growing up in a town with an Andrew Carnegie library, going to the library, going to the Webster's Unabridged Dictionary, which was this huge book that sat on a shelf, open all the time, looking up homosexuality and finding out that word was really smudged or in the Encyclopedia Britannica to find out that the little pages were bent down around homosexuality, you know, I didn't know anybody. It was obvious that other people other than I were looking up these words, but we didn't know where they were. There were no pride organizations, no SGAs, no pride flags, no parades. There was nothing. So growing in isolation and growing into language to be able to describe what you were was a significant thing. So I, as a 74-year-old, I'm tickled pink when I look at the work being done at places like Lurie's Children's Hospital here in Chicago, where they have toddlers who are 3 years old who are saying, not a boy, you know, or they have children 9 years old saying, yes, I think I'm gay. You know, wow, amazing. So times have changed, and we support those time changes. Yes, we ask you to be aware of our past, but we also ask that you allow us to be part of the present, because we've seen that arc of progress and we're very excited about it. Now, getting back to the three communities that I wanted to represent. Here in Illinois, we want to underscore the fact that our communities of need are not just in our large urban centers, not just in Chicago. You know, LGBT elders live in downstate, in rural, in exurban, in small town spaces in all of our states, you know, and they need support too. Oftentimes, you know, they have much smaller social networks with which to deal, and much smaller levels of resources on which to depend, much more limited connection. So we are making it our mission to find out where all of our citizens are and to ask them the basic question of, how well are you being served by the state of Illinois, by all of its institutions, by all of its organizations? And then to do that, we're having to foster institutional change too. One of the things that we're working on is the inclusion of SOGI information in all of our data collection, you know, and some people are like, oh, I don't want to ask about sexual orientation. That's really kind of personal. And that's because the general community sees this community in terms of what we do sexually, rather than understanding that sexual orientation and gender identity is not what we do, but who we are. And when we make that cultural change, then society will all benefit from it, because everyone is affected by their sexual orientation and gender identity. It's just a matter that if you're white, you don't have to ask what whiteness means. Well, if you're straight, you don't have to ask what straightness means. But it is as much a part of you as anything else. For the advocacy of my neighbors here at Town Hall, I would like to let you know that there are people who have already experienced the aspirational housing that you want to build. And this is an important community to stay in touch with, because they can tell you what it's like. You know, right now, all of your plans are aspirational, but you need the feedback of what happens when it's really realized. Unfortunately, most of our advocates are younger and have not had the lived experience of this particular age. So when we opened Town Hall, we had emergency buzzers that were placed too high to be reached when a person was in an emergency situation. We had an absence of some door openers that didn't function correctly. There were issues about the building and rolling out. And it wasn't intentional. It's just that in the development process, the actual lived experience of older people was not taken into consideration. So, you know, come visit us, come see this property and other LGBT affirming properties to see the results of what's happened and ask the people who've lived there about the project after it's been completed. And finally, from my point of view of being a board member at One Roof Chicago, we're looking for building, not just a building, the process of building affirming housing is not just the acquisition of a piece of land and the stacking of bricks and mortar. What you're building, first of all, is community. And so the first consideration is how that space is going to function socially. And one of the things that we experience here at Town Hall that we hope nobody else ever has to experience again is at the point this building was being developed, there were people of goodwill and all components of the partnership that brought us Town Hall. And somewhere down the line that changed, and there was a change in management and ownership that led us away from the commitment to being an LGBTQ affirming community. And so if you could avoid that by good planning in the beginning, that'll be really great for your residents. My time is up. I thank you very much. I hope I didn't make your ears bleed, and I will turn it back to our host so you can get on to some good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. I always appreciate that perspective of where we've come from in the community. Next up, I'm going to pass it off to Brad to talk about some specific work that Penrose has been doing.
Thank you, Philip. Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me and see what hopefully is the presentation? I see nods. Very good. Again, Brad Mining with Penrose Development. As Philip alluded to earlier, I was called up from the minors as a very late substitute. I learned I was doing this last night. Unfortunately, my colleague, who many of you may know, Shannon Cox Baker, had a family emergency that she had to attend to, and so I beg for your patience and tolerance as I work through this. But I do want to thank Housing Colorado and Philip for putting this on, and especially for Sydney, Don, and Michael for sharing their expertise and their experiences. This is a really cool topic, and frankly, when I joined Penrose earlier this summer, this was a big part and a big motivator for me as to why I joined Penrose and what attracted me, because they're really kind of putting themselves out there and working on this really cool, unique, and I think, as you hear from Sydney and Don, growing or long need that is now a kind of growing practice. So I'm very excited to be a part of, hopefully out here in the state of Colorado in the West. Penrose is a privately held full-service real estate development shop, also a management company. We've been in existence for about 50 years, headquartered in Philadelphia, have about 27,000 units that we've developed in 16 or 18 states, something like that. A few hundred different developments. So new to Colorado, Penrose brought Shannon Cox Baker on a couple of years ago. And again, I joined as a second member of the team out here just earlier this summer. I'm thrilled to be here and share this experience with you guys. Here quickly is a map, just so you can kind of get orientation of where Penrose is active, and also examples of LGBTQ plus affirming housing that we have either completed or in the process of trying to complete or are looking to complete, in every case with partners around the country. It's really quite a cool story that, again, that attracted me. And as legend has it, Penrose kind of got brought into this work a little over a decade ago in Philadelphia, where we were headquartered. Story goes that Mark Siegel, a longtime activist and community member in Philadelphia, much like Don is in Chicago, was at a social function, and he had kind of lived many of the same experiences that Don shared with you guys, and saw his friends and his fellow activists who had worked very hard to kind of organize and create kind of their neighborhood in Philadelphia, all of a sudden being unable to afford to remain in it as kind of gentrification took hold And so he was at a function with one of our principals at Penrose, a social function, just started talking about his experience and his passion. And what he really wanted to do was to try to create affordable housing options for LGBTQ plus elders in Philadelphia. And basically said, "Is this something that you Penrose can do?" And credit to our principals, he said, "Yeah, I think we can." And so that's kind of how we got going. This is the first project that Penrose was able to complete, located in the heart of City Center, Philadelphia. John C. Anderson Apartments, named after a gay member of City Council there in Philadelphia. First community, I think second in the country technically. There was one in LA that was built, but first in Philadelphia, built in an area where lesbian and gay and their friends and our other marginalized communities could establish their own community in an open and accepting environment. Over time, this part of City Center really became more and more expensive, as I was talking about. This apartment building was built over 6 stories, includes indoor and outdoor community spaces. Residences, about 1,900 square feet of retail space, which is operated by Square One, a coffee shop. And out of the 56 units, there's a variety of different incomes served, 6 of them down to 20% of area median income and below, a big chunk between 20 and 50, and then a handful between 50 and 60% AMI. So also a very mixed income community, but like the models that Sydney talked about, all of them kind of income and rent restricted to lower incomes, financed with low-income housing tax credits, and some gap funding and support from the city of Philadelphia, as well as the state of Pennsylvania to make it happen. It's a total development cost of about $20 million. I got to see this building when I was out for my onboarding experience, and it's beautiful. It's really cool. And I hope any of you that ever get a chance to visit Philadelphia will stop by, because it's an awesome community. Another example that we recently completed in 2022 in Cincinnati, Ohio, the John Montgomery Arthur Apartments. John was a Cincinnati native and a husband of the plaintiff in the Supreme Court case that legalized same-sex marriage in the United States. So again, long history and stories that kind of manifest themselves into these communities. 57 units in this case, studio 1 and 2 bedroom units, again, all restricted between 30 and 60% of area median income, tax credit finance with a variety of amenities, fitness center, community space, outdoor terrace, on-site laundry and parking. And again, you'll hear a recurring theme throughout this, right? And Don alluded to this. In some ways, the sticks and bricks and mortar, if you will, although it's not easy in the affordable housing world, as many members of Housing Colorado will know, in some ways it is very much the easy part. And what really makes these communities work and act and feel like communities are the participation and partnerships with one or more local organizations, cultural centers that really are the kind of magnets and really make these places home to the residents and the surrounding neighborhoods. And in this case, the Council of Aging in Southwestern Ohio, and Carousel and the Greater Cincinnati Region's nonprofit aid service organization are all partners in this development. And again, a complicated layer cake lasagna of affordable housing financing tools, including home funds, federal home loan bank grants, tax credits, and other soft sources. But again, a really cool project that I have yet to see with my own eyes, but hope to one day. This is a really beautiful building in Boston called the Pride. This is a 100-year-old school building that Penrose worked to convert into LGBTQ senior housing over the age of 62. It's 74 units, a mix of studios, 1s and 2-bedroom units. The name The Pride emerged through kind of community conversations and reflections throughout the process with the community, connections between the community and the location in that historic building in the heart of the Hyde Park neighborhood. There's a 10,000 square foot community center that would be included in this building. It'll serve as a vibrant gathering place. The community center includes a learning classroom, a library, art exhibition space, and hosts Portraits of Pride, a photography project that presents large-scale and intimate portraits of LGBTQ plus leaders through curated exhibitions and special installations. Really cool. There'll be a multi-purpose space for neighborhood meetings and events. So really the idea is that it's not just the residents, right, that live here that are welcome here, that the whole community's here, and the community felt strongly that they wanted to have spaces that people could use and gather as a neighborhood and as a community. So a big public wing of the Pride will also host office space for the 54th Regiment, 100% volunteer organization committed to preserving the history of brave African American soldiers who served in the U.S. military during the Civil War and trained at Camp Meigs in the Reedville section of Hyde Park, as well as including offices of LGBTQ Senior Housing, our nonprofit partner there. Again, financing, complicated mess. The Boston mayor's office put in about $4 million. Another close to $4 million came from the Department of Housing and Community Development in Boston. TD Bank and Redstone were equity partners. Again, tax credits were a big part of this. Highly complicated, and you can see the building. I mean, an expensive renovation project, but certainly something that I think every neighborhood would love to have in their community. And the fact that we were able to preserve a beautiful historic school building and just repurpose it with an awesome use that we have, I'm very proud of, and I hope that we get to do more of these projects nationally. A newer one, the city of New Haven, Connecticut, has recently chosen Penrose to redevelop the Horace H. Strong School in Fairhaven after it's been shut down and closed for about 12 years. The plan is to convert this building into 58 affordable housing units and a multi-purpose art space as well. We aim to ensure accessibility in the space through a collaboration with the New Haven Pride Center, again, local nonprofit, recurring theme, which provides educational and social support to members of the LGBTQ plus community. Again, deeply affordable property tax credit finance is the plan, 30 to 80% mix of incomes. And then a handful of them kind of deeply affordable and targeted, below the 30% AMI threshold. Total estimated cost for this one is about $25 million. Again, similar mix of affordable housing financing tools, local partner taking on space and making sure that the community is truly a community. And then Penrose, Riseboro Community Partnership, and Habitat for Humanity of New York City have been designated to build Haven Green, 123-unit affordable rental complex, again, for senior citizens in Little Italy, Manhattan. Haven Green is a unique senior housing development opportunity expected to consist of a mix of affordable, extremely low, very low, and low-income senior housing, 37 apartments for seniors who have been formerly homeless. So that's a new kind of component with an added layer of complication and marginalization for those who have had the trauma of not just being an LGBTQ plus senior and living through all the traumas and difficulties that Don alluded to, but also having found themselves homeless and without a roof over their heads for many years. This is really critical and important, and again, something that I'm proud that Penrose is a part of. It's a growing process and a growing problem that we know across the country, and certainly not unique to New York City. Here in Denver, we have a well-documented issue with the permanent supportive housing and homelessness. And in fact, our first project here in Colorado is being topped out and will be completed in April. 2700 Rewada Way in the Donargo Market area is actually housing designated for transition-aged youth, right? So not an elder problem, in fact, 18 to 26-year-olds. But as we're learning through working with that population and working with our partner together, that a vast majority of those individuals who are struggling with homelessness as youth identify as marginalized, and more than half, a majority of them also identify as LGBTQ plus. So learning, again, to Don's point, that this isn't just a senior issue, that there are challenges across the age spectrum. And so again, we're learning as we go. This has been a fun experience for me to continue to learn and experience this, and again, very excited to be a part of what Penrose does next, hopefully here in Colorado, which I will get to now. We are working on an opportunity in the Clayton neighborhood in partnership with the Center on Colfax. Those of you in Colorado are probably familiar with the center. Long-time LGBTQ plus activist organization, has a variety of program and resources, including those for seniors, and are excited to partner with them on identifying hopefully what will be Colorado's first LGBTQ plus tax credit financed affordable housing opportunity in the Clayton neighborhood, targeting hopefully a 4% in state tax credit application next year. And hoping to kind of bring these learnings from our other developments in other cities, other markets, to the great city of Denver. And then to Don's point, I think we're also keeping an eye on the rural challenges that exist, right? Because in at least many of these projects you've all seen are in big populated cities. There are established resources and programs and nonprofits to support the critical mass, but those are lacking oftentimes in rural communities, and so we're trying to figure out, right, how we can expand this effort to smaller communities where there isn't a critical mass of those kinds of services. But again, it's something I'm very excited about, very proud of, and happy to be a part of, and it's a thrill for me to continue to learn and be on programs like this with individuals like Don and Sydney and Michael, as I continue to learn about this effort. But that's just a quick example of some of the projects that we've worked on nationally. Some of them are built, some of them are to be built. I will share the slides with Philip, and you guys are free to explore research online, learn about the project. Sydney probably knows about them more than I do at this point, given her experience. But with that, Philip, I'll turn it back to you and let Michael close us out. Thank you guys again for having me.
Thank you, Brad. And just for my curiosity, can you tell me when the York apartments are opening or scheduled to open?
Well, we got to get our financing together, Philip. So it's a long ways off. Everything goes well, sometime in late 2025, early 2026. But as you know, there's a big competitive process that we got to get through, along with many of our other affordable housing funds.
I was just curious how far along in that process you were. But look forward to giving you an Eagle Award when they come around.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Brad. And now, as Brad mentioned, to wrap us up, I'm going to turn it over to Michael to talk about some services for aging LGBTQ plus.
Great. Thank you, Philip. I am going to share my screen. Hopefully you all can hear me. My name is Michael Chifolo. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the LGBTQ plus program specialist at the Boulder County Area Agency on Aging. And so Boulder County is here in Colorado. And so we are very excited about the new stuff that's happening here in Denver. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the service side of things. And to start us out, to talk about what a AAA is. No, it's not the roadside assistance, and no, it's not the auto insurance, but instead it's the Area Agency on Aging. And so there are 16 AAAs in Colorado and 622 across the US and its territories. And AAAs are a public or private nonprofit agency designated by states to address the needs and concerns of all older adults at the regional and local levels. And so the Older Americans Act, which is an important part of legislation that helps dictate what AAAs do, defines the core services for AAAs as nutrition, health and wellness, elder rights, caregivers, and supportive services. And so we here at the Boulder County Area Agency on Aging, our mission is to deliver, fund, and advocate for services that promote well-being, independence, and dignity for older adults, people with disabilities, family caregivers, and veterans in Boulder County. So it's a lot that we do here at the Boulder County AAA. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the services and how we accomplish that mission. Our programs and services are divided up into 4 teams. Our community living team houses our resource line. That would be the entree point for folks who need support. We call it our 1617 number. If you need any ongoing case management after reaching out through our resource line, we have resource specialists. And our rural areas here in Boulder County are the mountain regions. And our mountain specialists help folks be able to access those services that are sometimes harder to get up there into the mountains. Our Caregiver Initiative program helps provide support to caregivers. And one big challenge about caregiving is just the identification of yourself as a caregiver. Many folks don't see themselves as caregivers. They just look at themselves as people who are doing their duty as friends, family, families of choice for other people who are in need. And so our Caregiver Initiative program is very important. On our elder rights team, we have our long-term care ombudsman who are assigned to every assisted living and long-term care community in the county. Here in Boulder County, we have around 40 of those. We have a person who works on elder abuse and abuse in later life, since that's an issue for many folks, and making sure that we can identify what those issues are. We have a companion volunteers program that matches people who are experiencing social isolation with volunteers in the community to provide weekly contact. And then the LGBTQ plus program that I coordinate, which I'll talk about in a little bit more, is also a part of that elder rights team. Healthy aging is another important team that we have. We have wellness services that work on disease prevention and many other issues. Our nutrition, counseling, and home-based meal service falls under our healthy aging. And then we also have Medicare counselors who are very busy right now since it's open enrollment, who help support everyone in finding out everything they need to about Medicare. And then finally, to keep us all together, we have the business results team who works on contracts and compliance, our strategic planning, policy advocacy. Our veteran services fall under that. And then we have an aging advisory council of volunteers who help advise the work that we do here at the AAA. I mentioned our LGBTQ plus programs and services. We are very proud here in Boulder County to have been able to offer support to the LGBTQ community of older adults since 2000. And so for over 20 years, we have had an opportunity again to work hand in hand with this community. And so we are known as the Rainbow Elders of Boulder County. They gave themselves that name some 20 years ago, and it still sticks today. They quite love it. And when we were first convening people in the early 2000s to see what issues needed to be addressed, folks mentioned immediately that they were afraid about what it would be like if they had to access any kind of senior care. And so going into assisted living, long-term care, short-term rehab, having any caregivers come into your home, as mentioned before, that's a very vulnerable place to be in. And so we realized that that was our opportunity to develop a training program. And so in 2004, we created Project Visibility. And Project Visibility is our training program that aims to create inclusive communities for LGBTQ plus older adults. And so originally created for assisted living and long-term care communities, now branches out to any service provider who provides services to older adults. And also, really, quite frankly, anyone in the community who's interested in learning more about this population can sign up for our Project Visibility training. I will talk a little bit more in a minute about the Project Visibility training, and hopefully at the end can show you a trailer of the documentary that's a core piece of our Project Visibility training. But before getting there, I just wanted to talk about the services that we provide to Rainbow Elders. We have a monthly e-newsletter that goes out to over 2,500 people, Rainbow Elders in the area, their family, friends, and the service providers who help support them are all a part of that list. And so that's the best place to find out everything that's going on during with our services. We also have presence on Facebook for both Project Visibility as well as Rainbow Elders. And we're going to be sending out these slides afterward. And so you'll be able to check out these links then. And then also we have a website as well that outlines all of our services. And so a good place to check out what's going on. Two big times of the year for us. One is June. Obviously, June is Pride Month. And that recognizes the Stonewall riots that occurred at the end of June in 1969. And so that's why we have Pride Month during June. And so we work with our local, which is the equivalent of the Center on Colfax for the Denver area. We have out Boulder County. And so we work with them to to be a part of the many Pride festivals that take place here in Boulder County. Two big ones are in Boulder as well as in Longmont. There are many throughout other municipalities as well. And so we co-sponsor a 50+ mixer with them. And so these are a couple of pictures from the 50+ mixer as well as from Pride. And so always exciting to show pictures of yourself or uncomfortable, right? The other time of the year that's really big for us is in December. And so in December, we put on our largest event, which is the Lavender Gala, and that's coming up in less than a month. And so on Sunday, December 3rd in the afternoon, we will convene over 100 people at Nisi's entertainment venue and event center in Lafayette to have an afternoon of fun with food, entertainment, dancing, door prizes, lots of exciting stuff happening there. And so people can attend this event for only $12.51. And so you will also get these slides, like I said, and if you're local and would like to join us, you can use that QR code to purchase tickets. And also if you're around, this area, please share with other folks that exciting event. This has been around for 23 years. We did the very first one in 2000. And as you can imagine, it's changed quite a bit over the 20 years that we've put on the event. But it's really functioned as an important component of building community for the LGBTQ+ older adults here in the area. And so just great to think about that. And on our webpage, we actually have a couple of historical videos. When we hit the 20th anniversary, we did some look backs and created some videos about just the importance of this event. I always love sharing a story during the third year where a lesbian couple drove all the way from Omaha, Nebraska, which is about, depending on how quickly you're going, a 7 to 8 hour drive. And so really nice to think about how important that was for folks to be able to have that community. Back to the project visibility training. Again, our goal is to create inclusive communities for LGBTQ+ older adults. And so we have a 2-minute trailer of that video, as well as the full documentary that's 27 minutes. And so again, both of these, the web links to the YouTube videos are on here. And also they're on our own webpage. And so you'll get all this information and you can check out the full documentary. Hopefully at the end of this, we're going to get to show the 2-minute trailer. There's also an online training, an asynchronous training that you can take, a start and stop video that was developed in thinking about like nighttime staff in, assisted living or long-term care communities that were maybe taking care of some people but had some downtime and could check out this. And so you also could register for that training and learn about what we do there as well. The new documentary that we just made, let me back up a little bit and tell you that the documentary has been a key cornerstone of the training since 2004. And so we've created a couple of different versions of that documentary. And so in 2004 was the first one. And then in 2010, we added a few different stories to make the video a little more inclusive. And so much has changed since back then that we've known for quite some time that we needed to do an update. And although a good 90% of the services that we provide are funded by general funds through the county, we do have to fundraise to do some special projects. And so in order to create this documentary, we applied for a Next 50 initiative grant and received one in 2022. And so in 2022, we worked together with the Alzheimer's Association Colorado chapter and hired the video production company Pixel Mills Studios to create the new documentary that has been out now for a year. It debuted in December of last year. And so we're just rounding out the first year of our new documentary. And so again, hopefully we'll get to show the trailer for that, and then you can check out the full 27-minute version of that documentary. And so just to tell you a little bit about the project visibility training and the documentary itself, the documentary is divided up into 6 different content chapters: coming out, family, oppression and discrimination, history and policy, language and terminology, and finally, advice for providers. And so it goes deeper, the documentary and then the training itself goes deeper into each of these issues as important platforms to talk about the experiences of LGBTQ older adults. We've talked about some statistics, and I just wanted to kind of reiterate some things that were brought up before, and then take it to the level of thinking about just care in general. But 34%, these statistics, by the way, come from Not Another Second, which is another great documentary that you can check out. And the link is on here. And these were collected in 2021. And so 34% of all LGBT plus older adults fear having to recloset themselves when seeking senior housing. And that seems a little low to me, because I think it would be a little bit higher than that, especially because 48%, nearly half of all LGBT couples experience adverse treatment when seeking senior housing. So Sydney alluded to this and shared a statistic about this earlier, but geez, that's half of the folks that are looking for senior housing. And so that's why it's really important for affirmative and intentional housing to be created. In terms of looking at services, and especially health and mental health services, about 20% of all LGBT plus people avoid medical care out of fear of discrimination. So that's 1 out of 5 people that just completely avoid medical care because they're afraid of how they're going to be treated. And so nearly 1/3, 1 out of 3 people of all transgender people do not even have a primary care doctor. And so they report poor general health overall. And so that's because 21% of all transgender people report that a doctor or other healthcare provider used harsh or abusive language when treating them. And so again, that's 1 out of 5 people who've actually experienced discrimination when seeking out health care. And so that's why it's important for us to provide these services, for us to provide the training to help create inclusive communities. And so just to kind of establish that. In terms of thinking about advice for providers, and of course our training goes deeper into all of this, if folks want to create inclusive practice, we suggest following these kinds of things here. First, everyone needs to be trained. There's lots of information, education, and learning, and that's not just taking one training and then it's all over. That's a continuous lifelong process. And so the more you learn, the more you need to learn. And so that's an important component of creating inclusive communities for LGBTQ plus older adults. We want to examine our language and terminology that we use both in speaking and in writing. And so this is, thinking about our forms. How do we collect information? What kinds of questions are we asking on our forms? How inclusive are they? Are we asking about pronouns? Are we collecting the SOGI information that Donald mentioned, sexual orientation, gender identity information? I always like to mention that, the last doctor that I signed up with did have inclusive forms, and I felt so good and so validated as I was filling that out that I was like writing things in the margin, flipping it over, and it just felt very validating to be asked those questions and to be included in that way. And so it does make a difference for people. Visual representation in the communities are important. Affirming signs, you are included here, you are welcome here. Lots of different ways that could be illustrated for folks. But I think that, on your front doors, on your windows, I think it's important for people to see those messages. And even more importantly for folks to be able to experience that inclusive care, inclusive and affirming care. And then also inclusive images in terms of, what pictures are you showing? Do an inventory of your space. Who are the folks that are displayed on the walls? Can people look and see themselves? And so not just with LGBTQ plus inclusion, but just thinking about all intersections of identity and how we can make sure that the images that people see are inclusive and that people can look up and they can see themselves in those. And then finally, having an anti-discrimination policy or an inclusive practice policy is important. We want to have those policies. We want to have them posted. We want to make sure our staff knows about them. And we want to make sure that everybody lives and breathes with those policies. And so make sure that they're actually implemented in real life. just to kind of summarize, the LGBTQ plus older adults need LGBTQ affirming care. They need informed and educated staff. They need dignified, respectful, and kind treatment. And they need inclusion and celebration. I think it's really important to think about, yes, people are welcome here. Yes, we're inclusive, but geez, let's move to the next state of like being celebratory for folks. Like, when people share who they are and they share intimate details of their lives, let's reflect that back. Let's validate them by including those things. So if I tell you I have a partner and we're getting ready to celebrate our 20-year anniversary and his name is Rodney, I would hope that you would ask next time that we're around, how's Rodney doing? So let's make sure we celebrate those things about those folks. Just as a final slide, thinking about how a AAA could support intentional and affirming housing. There's lots of ways. I think the first thing is that we could be a venue for publicity and perhaps recruitment of folks. That collaboration can carry out in many different ways, but one of the most I think promising ways is that we could be a host of the wraparound services that we could offer to folks. And so just some ideas of ways that AAAs can be involved in that. And of course, as many people have noted, none of these housing developments take place without the partnerships and collaborations. And so as we know, it takes a village. And so we want to all get involved in that. That is the end of my slideshow. And so what I hope to do now is to show you the 2-minute trailer from our documentary, and that will require me to click a few buttons over here so I can find out where it is and share my screen again to share that. So, all right, and I want to make sure I check both of these. I always talk out loud so that I make sure I cover everything. Okay, so here we go.
When I came out, I had to, I guess, grieve. I didn't think of it as that. There was some giving up of things.
As a Black gay man, growing up in society, I've just always felt that I want to be respected and I want to be treated equally.
I knew what people thought I was. I knew how I felt. I didn't have any term for that. All I could do was try to explain to people my own emotions and how I perceived the world and how I wanted the world to perceive me.
We went to the 1979 March on Washington. We talked about sexism and homophobia and racism.
Ageism is something I haven't quite wrapped my head around. Gertrude Stein said, "You're always the same age inside." I just don't climb trees anymore.
We created this Project Visibility documentary to showcase the lives of local rainbow elders so that then we can provide the services that will help create, an environment where people feel included, where people belong.
These are the most vulnerable moments of someone's life, and it's very, very scary to trust someone to care for you on that personal level.
The farther we spread the information about Project Visibility, the better it is for folks who are in assisted living, folks who are aging. We all know the stories about somebody having to go into an assisted living facility and they go back in the closet.
I hear all the time, "You're welcome." So it doesn't mean anything. And I don't want to be accepted. I want to be celebrated. And that's what I look for, is a place where people are going to celebrate who I am.
And that concludes my presentation. Thank you. Maybe.
There we go. I got it. Thank you, Michael. Very good stuff there. I appreciate it. I'm going to now turn this over to some questions, and if you have questions, please throw them into the Q&A. But while we're waiting on that, there's a couple that have already been asked and answered. I'm not going to read these in total, but feel free to check them out yourselves. Dana had asked about NIMBYism when it comes to building these sort of affordable housing projects. Brad and Sydney responded to that. The importance of partnerships and longstanding LGBTQ plus organizations, educating the community, combating misinformation, and Sydney pointed out that it's depends on the local community climate and context. Some projects experience anti-LGBTQ plus pushback, but more generally, we don't often see overt anti-aging. That is, of course, what we see, put in my 2 cents, with all affordable housing projects is overt. We don't want those people in our backyard is not as common as we don't want to deal with the parking issue or something like that. There's always an excuse.
We love what you're doing. We just don't think this is the appropriate location for it.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that we get more often.
Yep.
That's frustrating.
And it's not easy. Someone else had asked for email addresses. Those are actually on the event page. If you go to where you originally signed up for this, I had put everyone's email address except Brad because Brad wasn't on our list yet. But Brad has thrown his email address into the Q&A, and I will also send those out at the end. Another question for the group: have any of these housing projects had security problems? Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, Don, go for it.
Yes. Yes, our security problem was actually in our owner not recognizing, not having the cultural awareness at the time to react to a security problem. So they ran into some financial issues and they took the security funds from all of their portfolio and took them away. And when we called them on that, their representative said to us that security was a luxury. Well, our location in Chicago is on the main strip of Boys Town on Halsted Street at the intersection of Addison, which is 3 blocks east of Wrigley Field. So we have thousands of people who are not in our community at any time, who are not part of our community, visiting us at all times. And in this age of hostility, we thought it was less than sensitive to our need to remove security at that time.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah. Anyone else have any comments about security at your properties?
Any view? I mean, I don't know of any other than I think security is an issue, and the safety of our residents is an issue at every property, right? And it's important, especially important in these cases for the issues that Don just shared. But I don't have any specific anecdotes to share.
Eric has an interesting question that I was actually going to ask myself. Are there any specific design considerations you have for inclusive housing that you recommend for architects to consider?
Well, I'll just share that we have a toolkit that talks about some key components of both aging and kind of trauma-informed design. And so I think there are many things to think about in terms of accessibility, wheelchair access, the ways that you can prevent falls, the lip of a sink on a unit so that like water doesn't drip, and safety concerns like that. Excuse me, accessibility in restrooms. But then I think also in terms of LGBTQ plus affirming, there's a wide range of things like gender neutral bathrooms being on the first floor. This is more accessibility, but having seating areas where people can wait for accessoride or wait for transportation, because often there's time that people need to be in the lobby space. And also thinking about cultivating community and deinstitutionalizing space and thinking about traumatic histories. And so like the lighting, the use of plants, smaller, more intimate spaces for people to gather, but also larger, more community spaces for people to gather to host events to kind of break the isolation we see with LGBTQ plus seniors, to gather around food, which is often something that can begin to bring people out if they're not as used to being out amongst their peers. And then things like, gardening for therapeutic support, but making sure that gardening beds are raised and accessible. So, there's all kinds of things to think about, I think, in terms of like trauma-informed design and accessibility. And I'll stop there because I'm sure my colleagues have other things to say too.
I would just like to add quickly to that list that one of the things that is growing in conversation around the designing of these places is consideration for parts of the population that have additional need for personal storage space and for privacy around presentation, for some trans members of our community, around ability for some members of our community who might have additional issues around incontinence and those kinds of things. So they need more personal space for storage of personal items.
And I would just add, I think from, my perspective is that, it's long been a challenge for affordable housing developers, I think, to be good creators of kind of non-residential space, right? Oftentimes zoning might require that the ground floor is a retail or commercial community. And I think we tend to just go, well, I know how to do the housing. I'll build the box and I'll figure out how to kind of fill it later or work with a broker or whatever. And I think, especially in this case where you've got an organization or organizations who are going to be on site and providing resources and tools, like having them as part of the planning process from the beginning, before you even engage a design team or an architect or a contractor, right? To help plan out not just the space, but how it lives, how it functions, and how it welcomes people from the community into the neighborhood. Again, not just for the residents, but for the surrounding community. These are all by definition kind of designed to be welcoming places that everybody can come, and so that implicates what the street level experience, I think, looks like. And so, in addition to all the stuff that Sydney and Don mentioned, having a partner again on board early, thinking through how this place lives and breathes, really manifest into better communities.
And I would add quickly that contextuality is also important, just as the residents of the community don't want to stick out. They want to fit into where they're going. The building itself, the development itself, should be contextual with the neighborhood in which it's going, so that it doesn't stick out as the big gay place.
I could make a comment there, but I kind of like big gay places, but that's just me. Mary had a question going back to security. What type of security do you use?
I mean, I don't know the name of our security. We have just a contract with a security team. And I do know that I think sometimes there's concern around, for communities that have been historically over policed, what does it mean to have security systems in place and worry about people feeling like they're being watched? But then we got feedback from folks in our building when we did not have a full 24-hour security that people wanted 24-hour security. And so again, it's about really listening to what the tenants and the residents in the community say that they need in that space to feel safe. But it's really a contracted out group of folks that provide security at our buildings, at least.
What my neighbors and I have stated is that we have, first of all, a desire for 24/7 security, because most businesses, most institutions operate on a business day plan, but we're where people live. And so it's as important that we have support at 3 a.m. Saturday night as it is 3 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon. And in addition to that, we also request cultural competency training for the security force. It's very important because we are inviting them into our community. And once a community is operating, the distinction between who is staff and who is resident goes away. We become one great big community. And so our security people have to be open to that.
Please. Elfried called out just for you, Donald, that she's a former Chicagoan and used to live in Boys Town area and loves the work you're doing in Chicago. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mary Ellen asked if there are specific plans for rural housing developments. How might that manifest in Colorado? Anybody have any insights into Colorado projects or rural projects in general? Might be coming up.
As I mentioned, we're definitely thinking about it and looking into it, right? I do know that both Housing Colorado and CHAFA are great resources. CHAFA has, I'm blanking on the acronym, maybe somebody can put it into the Q&A or the chat that knows, but they have kind of technical assistance providers on staff that help smaller communities kind of who are struggling just as much as big cities with housing affordability challenges to kind of provide them resources and tools, market studies, advocacy, information, financial planning, et cetera. And so, I would encourage small communities to look into the resources available to both CHAFA and Housing Colorado. And then I think I would encourage Housing Colorado and CHAFA to also think about what it might look like to add a layer of kind of LGBTQ plus affirming services and resources and tools to that program, in case that's a question or a challenge that comes up specifically in communities. But for all the reasons, right, just affordable housing is very difficult everywhere, and it's even harder in rural, more remote communities where there just isn't the critical mass of labor force and resources and tools and financial, organizations who are more well-heeled. And so it's a constant challenge, but it makes the problem that much more difficult.
Yeah. A couple questions here from Mary. The first is, do any of your communities have fragrance-free policies to address disabilities affected by fragrance chemicals, or any of the buildings designed with safe materials, which is one step above green LEED, L-E-E-D? I'm not sure what that refers to. Does anyone have any information about that?
Yes, our building is LEED certified.
Leo,
and it's a combination of the reclamation of, interestingly enough, a former police station, which was once a site of oppression for our community, and new construction. And that it was completely, the old building was completely renovated so that the whole complex now has LEED certification.
And Mary Patrick, I'm not frankly, admittedly familiar with the kind of safe materials designation. Love to learn more about it, but I do know that affordable housing in particular, and certainly with CHAFA pushing us, right, is that we're always trying to stay steps ahead of code and certification programs. And because these are designed to be long-term assets that we hold on to and manage and have partners for many, many years, it makes sense to take the extra step up front and invest more in safe design and safe building, safe materials, sustainability, green energy efficiency, because these need to last a long time. And so we're not able to kind of take a shortcut and sell it in 3 years, right? We have to live with the assets that we build. And so we're always looking to improve the quality and the designs that we're creating, again with a long shelf life in mind, because we don't want to have to redo these things in 5 years. We can't, in fact. So it makes sense. But Mary, if you have more information about those programs, I'd love to read up and learn more about it. It's new to me.
And one last question from Mary, or not Mary. I don't want to tell you can't ask any more questions, but she wanted, this is specifically to Brad about transitional housing programs for youth. Any intergenerational plans? And I think, Dawn, you had actually mentioned something about these programs as well. So maybe both of you can respond.
So this first one, no, it's 100% designated for 18 to 26-year-olds, kind of youth, primarily aging out of foster care, who oftentimes don't have, for many of the same reasons, don't have a traditional familial network, right? Need to find a community of choice where they feel safe and accepted. And so our programming and our partner together, and I would encourage you to look up Together, and they'd probably have much better answers and resources for you. TGTHR.org, I believe, is their website. Annie Bocci, formerly of Corporation for Supportive Housing, is now the ED there. Is a brilliant mind and a great partner, and they very well may have more intergenerational plans. But in that specific development, it is 18 to 26-year-olds who we are targeting.
And formal Eagle Award winner. I just got to throw that out there from the Housing Colorado.
There you go.
Go ahead, Don.
Yes. In the development of One Roof, we have an emphasis on youth also. One Roof is anticipated to be a 100-unit residence, 80% going to elders, and 20% or 20 units going to youth. And we first of all recognize that the homeless community, the homeless youth community in Chicago, is guesstimated to be 60% LGBT identified. And wherever you are, if there's a youth homelessness community, it's likely to be heavily LGBT identified as a result of people being estranged from their communities and their families of origin. And recognizing that, we've made this not only a place where we want to provide residence, but we want to provide socialization that one would miss in one's youthful years from being connected to older generations. We're building in formal work development programs. One of the intersections of the two generations that we're focusing on is healthcare training, where we introduce the opportunity to become CNAs, and to, in fact, if one youth is a youth member is motivated in the area of healthcare, to provide additional support and training up to and including going to medical school or nursing school or associated health care provision, healthcare fields. But we see that as one of the places where the two generations can link themselves. So that will be a part of what we're doing in that housing space.
John? Somebody raised their hand and then took it away. I'm not sure if that was an accident or, but if somebody does have questions that they would rather just read out loud, do feel free to raise your hand. We don't have any more questions right now in the Q&A. I'll ask one more just to give people a chance to type some in. I have a question from my own head. I'm wondering about what advice you would give to a standard affordable housing building that is not necessarily targeting LGBTQ plus elders or even community members, to be more inclusive, so that they, I'm thinking back to the rural conversation. It's going to be hard to fill a building of 150 LGBTQ plus elders in rural Colorado, but if we are inclusive in the buildings that we are building, what do you think that would look like?
Well, I would say, first of all, what you have to consider, again, is the community that you're going to have. One of the greatest problems that's faced, not only by LGBT elders, but by elders who may be racially stratified, is bullying within the community. And so you have to establish an environment where there's a Bill of Rights, a community Bill of Rights, stating that all people are welcome here, and letting people know that while they're free to hold any belief that they want to, and in our society it's true, it's called a prejudice, but you can hold any prejudice or any adverse opinion of anyone that you want to. You have a legal right to do that. But what you cannot do in our society is discriminate. So no matter what you think of your neighbors, you do not have the right to make their lives miserable by by confronting them with that, by inflicting your values on them, that kind of thing. And the community, the housing unit itself should reinforce that. So relationships between residents is very important.
And I'll nod to Michael, right? But I think reaching out to organizations like area agencies on aging, right? Because they're, you heard Michael talk about their mission. Housing wasn't specifically mentioned as kind of their core mission, but yet here he is on a podcast with Housing Colorado talking about affordable housing needs, right? So they hear it all the time from their residents, and they have a long list of clients, elders who need housing, need other resources, and they're a great kind of co-partner. Michael, how many area agencies on aging are in Colorado? You said 8 or 18, something like that.
16 in Colorado.
So there's bound to be one that focuses on your rural community. Look them up, or Michael can help you find them. But I think thinking outside of the traditional housing marketing box and putting your information up on websites and having a website, I think you have to go above and beyond and think through other kind of referral agencies, because they're often the ones that are more keenly aware of specific needs and individuals and households and families in need.
I think also just, making sure that you're committed to and overtly and publicly committed to LGBTQ plus affirming community. And, that should be intersectional in terms of anti-discrimination, anti-oppression for all communities. But we know we can't build this type of housing to meet the needs. So how do we make current housing and established housing more affirming? And I think the commitment that is shown from the top down, from leadership at an agency or an organization, and the people working directly with tenants in cultural competency training, in community agreements, in like Michael said, finding ways to create affirmation in a space and boldly show in an anti-discrimination policy that LGBTQ plus identity is protected rather than it being assumed or not. There are ways that you can cultivate cultural competency in a space, in any housing space, and those are tools that I'm sure my colleagues and I can also share if people have questions.
Another question here for Brad. Do you happen to know the address for the York Street development?
Yes, but I probably shouldn't share for protection of the owner that we're still working with and getting under contract. But it's near the Greenbelt up there.
Excellent.
Greenway.
Thank you. That is all the questions. Go ahead,
Don. To all of the people who are participants here, I appreciate the fact that you're focused on developing LGBT affirming housing. But the reality is that what we should be focused on long term is changing the climate in our society. We have here at Town Hall, out of the 79 units and 93 residents, we have 65 who are LGBT identified. This project from conception to conclusion has been around for about 12 years now. If we succeed in building One Roof Chicago, we won't be opening for about 4 more years. And that will mean that we will add about 70 LGBTQ identified people to the thing. So, that's fewer than 200 in a span of 20 years. So we can't build our way out of this project. We have to work on changing our American culture to make it LGBTQ inclusive. So beyond the actual projects that you work on, your presence, your advocacy in your spaces, in your professional and your personal spaces is important to meeting the need and serving this community long term.
You're done. And another question for Brad. You're popular today. You're chatting the answer. I'll let you go ahead.
Yes, Shannon and I are both based here in the metro area. Shannon lives in Boulder. I'm here in Denver, and we are the 2 Colorado reps for Penrose.
Cool. Thank you. we are about 15 minutes left, but I'm going to go ahead and let everybody go. I'm going to give you 15 minutes back in your day, which I don't know that that's necessarily a great thing. I already took an hour and 45 minutes away from it, but I appreciate everybody's time. I really appreciate Don, Michael, Brad, Sydney coming together to talk about this topic with us. As I shared, the slides as well as the recording of this will be posted and shared. Really appreciate the discussion. See some people popping into the Q&A with the same sentiments. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to stop the recording now. Maybe